Welcome back, Divas. Today we've got another conversation we recorded at the Florida Media Conference in Orlando recently. This time we sit down for a chat with Bobby Block, Executive Director of the First Amendment Foundation. Bobby talks about Florida's long history of access to public records and the importance of the public's access to public records and the role that plays in the public's ability to hold government officials to account. Stick with us. Bobby Block, Executive Director of the First Amendment Foundation.
The First Amendment only works when it works for everybody. You know, it has to protect conservative speech as much as it protects liberal speech. The point is, cancel culture, which a lot of people would like you to believe is the prerogative of a single party, is used by everybody.
You're listening to Deeper Dive with Dara, a podcast by the News Service of Florida. Let's dive in.
Oh, Divas, we are back here live at the Florida Media Conference. Is that right? Is that what it's called?
That's what it's called.
Okay. And my guest right now is Bobby Block, the Executive Director of the First Amendment Foundation. Welcome to A Deeper Dive.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here.
So thank you for doing this. You are here representing the First Amendment Foundation. Tell us a little bit about what your organization does and why you're here.
We were founded about 40 years ago by the newspaper industry, primarily at the time to defend and protect and advance Florida's expansive public records laws and open government laws. And for obvious reasons, I think Florida had at the time some of the most comprehensive and effective open government laws in the country. And for obvious reasons, I think the newspaper industry saw that to be critical to hold politicians to account. Over the years, of course, those laws have weakened considerably. There have been more exemptions created to public records. It's increasingly difficult for a lot of people to police open government. We're very polarized. We have pretty much the domination right now in the state of predominantly one party. And there's a lot of places where one party has been in power for a long time, and when people get elected under those circumstances, and I don't think it depends on the party, I think it's just inherent to the nature of how power works, that you end up being a little bit more secretive. You don't want public information out there to the same degree. So we are seeing a growing threat to public information, to government being done in a way that the public can see how sausage is made. The other thing we have been doing, though, for the last 2 years is we've been living up to our name, and we have been protecting and defending the larger First Amendment issues, which basically involves primarily rights of expression, but free speech, free press, opposing book bans, opposing changing laws to allow politicians to sue critics. So these are the kinds of things that we get involved in. We have a hotline for the public and for members of the media that when they run into these kinds of issues where they're denied access to public records improperly, or they're ignored, or government decisions are taking place in the shadows, or their ability to address the government or to speak freely is being curtailed, they call us and we give them help. We do legal referrals.
Florida was kind of a model for government in the sunshine with constitutional amendment, giving the public the right to access records and meetings and not be held in secret. As you mentioned, the legislature has been sort of, I don't know if chipping away is a harsh term for it, but it is accurate to say there have been many, many exemptions, as you mentioned, to this constitutional right.
Almost 1,200.
1,200, and every year there are more.
About 36 more a year.
And it's like the dog catcher's address and phone number and his kid's address and phone number. I'm exaggerating, but it's many, many different kinds of government officials. Their information is now off limits. That's not the kind of exemption that I was really referring to, although those do keep expanding. You mentioned the limits on being able to sue. I know that was a controversy, not this legislative session, but the last legislative session. Do you anticipate that coming back up, and can you elaborate a little about that for our listeners and explain what that would mean for them?
It goes back to 1960. When a young lawyer and political activist named Martin Luther King was arrested in Alabama, and his legal defense fund put in advertisement in the New York Times appealing for support, but also trying to explain to Northerners what was going on with the civil rights movement in the South. And in this one particular advertisement, there had been some errors that were made. Nothing egregious, just mistakes about the number of police actions there were, how many times Martin Luther King had been arrested. And it was a strategy at the time, particularly in southern states, that they would sue the northern publications for defamation when there were statements, when there were understandable errors taking place, and that they would use these big awards to try to intimidate northern papers from coming down and reporting in the South. And
on the civil rights movement.
On the civil rights movement. And this you have to remember, it wasn't even an article, it was an advertisement. So because of these errors, they were sued by someone who the police kind of fell underneath him. He wasn't exactly the police commissioner, but he kind of fulfilled that role. The guy's name was Sullivan. And he sued, and the award against the New York Times was huge. I don't remember the exact number figure, but it would have been in the equivalent of many tens of millions of dollars.
This is today. The landmark case Sullivan that you hear referred to many times.
So in 1964, the case made its way to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court came up with a landmark decision in the case, New York Times v. Sullivan. And the decision was that when public officials were sued, because the First Amendment demands a vigorous public debate, and because vigorous public debates are sometimes ugly and messy and not really attractive, and because mistakes can be made, you can't use a simple mistake to punish a publication from expressing its right of coverage or free speech. And in the case of a public official and a public figure, and those are two different things. Public figure, you would think someone like Elon Musk. He's not elected to office. He's a public official because of his social prominence and being a captain of industry. And Donald Trump would be an elected official. But if you were a prominent person in either of these categories, you had to show, if you wanted to sue for defamation, that the information that you're claiming was defamatory was not just wrong, but that they should have known it was wrong. There was negligence on your part. You didn't bother to check the facts, or the information was too good, you needed to get it out, you didn't care whether it was right or wrong. And that changed the equation. The southern states could no longer just use a small mistake in an article. And what it has done over the last 60 years, it has given particularly journalists, but now I would argue with the rise of the internet, it gives all citizen reporters, all bloggers, all commentators on all social media pages, the ability to comment on government and government officials without being afraid that they're going to be sued into oblivion. What the state of Florida tried to do 2 sessions ago, and again this last year, was to lower that standard, was to rewrite the federal standard where you could be sued, that the rich and powerful could sue you if you made a mistake. Remember, in the 1960s, to basically have a platform where you could report or say something, You had to have money, or you had to own a TV station, or you had to be employed by a newspaper.
Now all you need is the internet and a phone, really. Not
right.
even a computer anymore.
You need an X account or a Facebook account, and you're a commentator.
Right.
So this would be bad for mom and pop bloggers. Imagine you've moved to Florida from Ohio. You've moved into a nice part of town. You like the environment, and they want to change the zoning rules. And you're fighting this, and it doesn't go in your direction. So you make a statement questioning the integrity of the city manager. Well, now he can't sue you. It's a comment. But if the law changes, you can't prove that he wasn't doing something untowards. You could find yourself at the pointy end of a very expensive lawsuit. It was a threat to public engagement. It's a threat to public debate. And most of all, it flips the power back in the favor of the rich and the powerful. That they have the ability, because they have the money, they have the bully pulpit, they will have the ability to sue you. The first time that law was proposed, it was proposed by Governor DeSantis, and his argument was this was being done to help the little guy. Little people don't sue. Suing's expensive. It's complicated.
Right.
Rich people sue because they can. If I'm a local business owner and I feel that there was a negative and unfair story written me about the paper in the local paper, I don't have to prove absence of malice. I don't have to show. I'm not a public official. I'm not a public figure. So those burdens aren't fair, but they tried to equate that in the public's mind with this was for everybody, when in reality it suits politicians and people in power.
And you think that this will be coming back?
Oh, it's almost certainly, we're told the sponsor of the bill will try again.
It was a coalition of not only the governor, the legacy media, and folks like yourself, but also, I think it was when the conservative bloggers and the conservative talk show folks and the conservative media people became aware of how this might affect them.
Right.
Didn't that really help to kill the bill?
What ended up happening was a lot of people saw the intention of the bill was to kind of level the playing field with quote unquote liberal media, that the New York Times would get their comeuppance and CNN would get their comeuppance. But what very quickly people realized, particularly broadcasters in religious radio and in conservative talk radio, realized that it was a double-edged sword. And just as easily you could have, wealthy people who are at the receiving end of criticism from conservative shows who could just as easily sue them into oblivion. And as a matter of fact, if you think about it, if you're a news station or even a TV station, you can change your coverage by virtue of the fact that you don't have to do investigative pieces. You don't have to go. You can just look at the traffic, the daily accidents, the arrest record. You can fill your pages with that. Is that ideal for your viewership or your audience? Not necessarily. However, if you're on talk radio, your whole platform is meant to be provocative. It's supposed to be a skillful mixing of innuendo and opinion and fact. And it's much harder in those circumstances. So they, in many ways, were more vulnerable. And once religious and conservative broadcasters realized that they were the ones really who sat most squarely in the crosshairs of laws like this, that they pushed back. And that's what had, until now, really has led to its defeat. And in my opinion, it is the perfect triumph of the First Amendment, because the First Amendment only works when it works for everybody. It has to protect conservative speech as much as it protects liberal speech.
Yeah.
The point is, cancel culture, which a lot of people would like you to believe is the prerogative of a single party, is used by everybody. My view about the First Amendment is it's really interesting in that everybody is supportive of it, but not necessarily for the right reasons. There's a lot of people on both sides of the equation who would like to silence the other side, but they don't want their speech silenced.
Right.
So there's a kind of paranoia and that, oh my God, I don't want them to say something, but I don't want anyone to take away what I'm saying. So the point of the matter is that we live in a time in which we want to say the things we want to say. We want to hear the things we want to say. And a lot of us want to silence the things we don't want to hear and the things we don't want other people to say. So it's really important for everyone to understand that the First Amendment is based on the idea that whether we like what people say or not, we need them to be able to say it. We need to be able to hear it. If you think about it, in the old days, before television, people would go out on a Sunday afternoon to the town square, and they literally would go to listen to people standing on soapboxes to speak. And a lot of it wasn't done that they went to debate them. They just wanted to hear what they had to say. So to some degree, although the technology has changed, that concept of that public square, the ability where we can freely exchange ideas without being afraid of being silenced or sued or punished or jailed, that is the cornerstone of all of our freedoms.
It is the First Amendment.
It is the First Amendment, and they call them, the 5 freedoms: freedom of speech, press, ability for assembly, religious worship, freedom from state religion. So all these things are really important. And the fact of the matter is, it really is for everybody. And the ability to defend and speak out on behalf of the First Amendment is actually not only quite an honor, but it's also really exciting, because in reality, you really get to help and to touch everybody. Not everybody's ideas are laudable. Not everybody's ideas are pleasurable. But the ability that we can air this all out, the ability that we can engage in debates, and we can be resilient enough as a society to understand that someone's ideas we may not like, but we allow them to speak, that's maturity, that's civilization, that's pretty impressive stuff.
Defending the First Amendment at a time now when things are so volatile. I mean, we just had less than 2 weeks ago an assassination attempt on a former president. I keep calling it tribal. The politics is so tribal now. It's kind of like you're either for us or you're against us. And I've heard people talking about, there's going to be a civil war if a certain candidate doesn't win. Does it make you feel like it's more necessary now than perhaps ever in our modern history?
I think that the only way that we get out of this mess that we're in is to recognize the fact that people have different opinions and that we need to talk to each other and exchange those ideas. I think the problem is when we seek to silence other people and when other people seek to silence us, that's when understanding breaks down. That's when emotions take hold. There's a word I used a minute ago, resilience. And I think that this is the one quality we're losing, is our resilience, our ability to basically hear things we don't like and to be able to say, well, okay, that's that person's opinion and they're entitled to that. It's like the concept of your body, to enjoy it, you have to exercise it. And it's the same thing with the First Amendment. The First Amendment needs to be exercised. And through the protection of the First Amendment, do we increase the quality of our public debate? And once again, it's not always going to be pretty. Public opinions can be very ugly. One of the conservative broadcasters, a Florida-owned company, they were writing editorials fighting the defamation. And one of the conservative editorials talked about, it's very tempting as conservatives to want to silence liberal voices, but we are far better off putting more of our own voices out there. And when I read this, I wanted to cheer because it was, yes, that's the point of it. And
drown them out rather than stomp them out.
Well, what they say is
or
always,
shut them out.
If you don't like, the best way to deal with hate speech is with good speech, with loving speech, speech that counters it. And I agree with that. The best way to resolve someone who's saying things you don't want to say is not to shoot him. It's to live your own personal truths.
The
speak your own
problem, though,
personal
Bobby,
truths.
I feel like that part of the problem is in the times that we're living in now. It seems to me that people are not persuadable. I mean, maybe this is not a problem. Maybe this is just like how we've evolved. And yes, get your message out, make it maybe louder than the other guy's message, or get your numbers stronger than the other side in terms of communicating what your positions are. But it feels like there are very few people now who, how this relates to the First Amendment. I'll let you figure that out. But it feels like there's a small, shrinking population of folks who are persuadable, who will listen to an argument, who will listen to the other guy's position with their ears and their brain and really hear what they're saying and change and be persuaded.
I mean, look, I think first off, these things go in cycles, and I think we're definitely in a cycle right now that's kind of on the more negative side of the equation. But I think that precisely the only antidote to that is to keep talking. And the First Amendment really, it's not about truth. It's not about truth. Truth is what journalists are here to sort out. Truth is what other people. We're talking about the ability to express an opinion or a viewpoint without fear of retaliation from the government itself. And that's really what we're talking about. We're talking about our ability to contribute to a public debate. And I think that as long as people are talking, even if they're talking in ugly ways, and even if neither side is persuading each other, talking is better than throwing fists. Talking is far better than firing weapons. And I think the more we talk, the less likely we are to do that. So, well, yes, I agree, people may be very entrenched right now. Part of the reason that they're so entrenched is we now live in a world of a lot of echo chambers, precisely because we live in a world of social media. We tend to surround ourselves with people who always think like us. So we're always looking for positive reinforcement or reinforcement of our own beliefs, confirmation bias, if you will. And while there's nothing wrong with that, the problem is when someone doesn't confirm your bias, how you react to that. And the First Amendment provides ground rules, in my opinion, for how we should react to that, at least in public spaces. Now, there's a lot of misunderstanding about the First Amendment as well. The First Amendment really applies between citizens and government. And
not people, not entities,
not like your, if you go to a private school, you don't have the same kinds of. It's not a government school.
Well, there's also now, there's the Supreme Court ruling in this. They're still considering this. Like, is Twitter, is Facebook, are they public forums? Yeah. Are they now, have they become utilities? Are they utilities? It's a very interesting question.
It's a really, if the town squares were privately owned, are they no longer town squares? It's a good question. And it's one that, if you think about it, I believe the technology, printing press was once a big technological breakthrough, right? Now the printing press has been with us for, hundreds of years. So we have new technologies emerging. And I think that we have to figure out how these new technologies work, and it's going to be an ongoing struggle. But I think that effectively, our ability, Congress shall pass no law, is a pretty clear statement, and, you can abridge some of these freedoms. And I think that out of this, I do believe it will prevail. Like everything else that takes place in the world, and definitely in the political time we're living in, some ideas are going to advance forward, and then they're going to end up timings of they're going to be retreat. It's a constant tension and struggle. We are a society riven by a lot of divisions and a lot of different. There's rural and rural. There's our rural areas and urban areas. There's racial. There's economic dividers. There's all these different things that, in theory, kind of represent what could be viewed as fault lines flowing underneath us. Yet we also have a lot in common. We have history. We have a concept of freedom that many countries around the world. I lived in the UK for a long time. There's no history of the ability of free speech. The government has the right to abridge what you say and to punish you for what you say, even in the modern world. This was an incredible advance, an incredible idea that the founding fathers had. And in many ways, there's an organization that we work with on the national level called FIRE, which stands for the Foundation for Individual Rights of Expression. And they defend free speech. Originally, they were interestingly founded by conservative money to defend conservative speech on campuses. Now they defend all speech everywhere, conservative, liberal, and otherwise.
I've watched their, the arc of their... I don't know, metamorphosis, I guess I've seen it.
Because the recognition is, like I said, it only works when it works for everybody.
Everyone, right.
And they have one of their slogans on their t-shirts, which I love, is free speech makes free people. And that is so true when you think about it. Our ability to be able to say, I think the president's a jerk, no matter which political party and which president you're talking about, and then you're able to go home and not fear that guys in ski masks are going to come in the middle of the night and take you away. That's a lot of people around the world.
We need to remember that people do live like that. There are many people, and there are journalists who are getting killed every day for having the kind of conversation that we're having right now.
Correct. Yeah. So I do believe it is first off, it was a revolutionary idea at a revolutionary time, but it's an idea whose time is still with us. It's just as important today as it was in the 1780s when this was first kind of being discussed.
We'll be right back with Bobby Block.
I'm John Morgan, and I'm asking you to vote yes on Amendment 3. Amendment 3 will be on your ballot in November, and it will allow adults to possess or safely use marijuana. That's a very good thing. Amendment 3 will put an end to bad laws that not only cost us millions in law enforcement dollars, but also cost thousands of Floridians their freedom. Vote yes on Amendment 3.
Paid political advertisement paid for by Smart and Safe Florida, 1400 Village Square Boulevard, Suite 3, 321, Tallahassee, Florida, 32312.
And before we get back to a conversation with Bobby Block, just want to remind you all, we love to hear from you. Drop us a line at podcasts@e.newsserviceflorida.com. That's podcasts@e.newsserviceflorida.com, or you can catch us on Insta or on Twitter. And now back to our chat with Bobby Block. What calls do you get more than any other kinds of calls? What do people need help with?
Accessing public records. A lot of people, whether it involves, it's very interesting. Most people don't intersect with public records unless they're having a problem with the government, someone's suing them. Usually you need access to public records when you are trying to correct a wrong, or you're looking for information to figure out what the situation is. And most people increasingly, even though this is a Florida, a constitutional right for all Floridians, the fact that we have a right to inspect and view public records, documents produced by the government in the course of governing, a lot of people are finding that they're being denied access. Now, a lot of public records, if you think about it, if you're someone wanting to avoid accountability for something you've done, the best way to do that is to make sure the information that could get you in trouble never gets out. So a lot of people call us, and most of the complaints are that they're having problems with public records. And it's increasingly difficult because, like I started out by saying, we once were the envy of the entire country in terms of the expansiveness of our public records. And now there's so many exemptions, and now it's so confusing that a lot of government agencies themselves, interestingly enough, at this very hotel, there's a police conference going on.
Yes, I know. It was strange bedfellows, the press and the police here together on the same floor.
Well, I had a police chief approach me and say, what the hell do you guys recommend about public records? This is, I swear to God, we need 5 lawyers to go through this.
Wow.
They've made it more complicated than the tax code. And he's not wrong.
Wow.
You have this incredible legal labyrinth that people have to go through when they ask for records. Like right now, for instance, one of the new exemptions is that, animal shelters, if you adopt an animal from a public shelter, the idea is that your name should be exempt.
What?
What if you're an animal abuser?
What?
What if you used to run a dogfighting ring?
What? I don't understand that. I'm sorry. I don't understand that at all.
Well, the problem is a lot of these exemptions often come. I'll give you an example of a thorny one. Several years ago, there was a woman whose children were killed, and she was in a violent domestic situation. They had joint custody. DCF gave both parents custody, and the father of the children had killed them. And she didn't realize the extent of their injuries until a news story came out. And she felt that she felt like she was being re-traumatized by seeing this information from autopsy reports that had been obtained through public records requests. Right. She felt that she had been traumatized again. And the immediate instinct of our lawmakers were, oh my God, these survivors of these domestic violence situations, maybe we shouldn't allow these autopsy reports of these minors to be out there. And I understand that. And the woman's anguish was real. What a lot of people don't understand is that for lawyers and journalists as well, sometimes the only way that we can keep a check on whether the state is doing its job is by looking at these autopsy reports, because often you could see that the signs that they placed the child with the wrong parent is there because there's constant hospital visits, doctor visits.
There's old traumas.
And what you can see from the records is, in this particular case, the Department of Child and Families should have said, wait a second, this is wrong. We need to get these children. So now, as a result of wanting to protect parents, which is a noble instinct, we now have inadvertently, by making these records exempt, made it easier for the state to hide the mistakes it makes in some of these cases. And it is a good example where, what could be problematic information being in the public that could be problematic for one person might have greater social benefit by being available. And often these exemptions, sometimes the exemptions that I have a problem with, that I don't think, that's an exemption that's worth debating. You should have a debate about that. There are two opposing sides that each have valid arguments. Where I think it's completely obscene is hiding bids for public projects in the name to protect competitive advantage. Wait a second, no, this is public money.
Secret, it's the trade secrets exemption that is used for all kinds of stuff. The marijuana, the medical marijuana applications, completely redacted from page 1 through the final page. There is no reason why all of that information should be redacted. That is not all a trade secret. The owners, the information identifying the owners is, come on, no.
How about what I think is the worst case of overreach? The governor hiding all travel logs.
They passed that,
but not just the travel logs for now, but in perpetuity. And the concept is
retroactively.
So, and the argument is our public officials need to be protected.
Yeah.
But my argument is we can protect our public officials and the public's right to know.
Yeah.
But in this particular case, because what should have been withheld, and I don't have a problem with this kind of information, anything that has to do with the number of police bodyguards that are with the governor. There's no need that we need to know that. We don't need to know the number of which car is the governor normally in a convoy. Those kinds of things. But who paid for it? Where are they going? Why are they going on that government business? Who went? Who are they visiting?
And where did they go?
Correct. That's information that in the past we know has even governors have gotten caught abusing state travel plans.
Yes.
And how do we know this? Because those records were always public.
What do you think? I know, and I have a meeting I want to go listen to, but I have one last question. You brought up this travel records as part of a lawsuit by the Washington Post trying to get some of these records, where the governors, I'm trying to remember if it's the chief of staff, someone, a high-ranking official in the governor's office, is saying that these records made on their personal phone or their personal email account are not a public record. Am I presenting it incorrectly? I think that's really what the fight is over, but I thought that was already settled.
The law is pretty clear.
Yeah.
If you use your personal phone to talk to, if you use, let's put it to a county commissioner. You're in a county commission, the county pays for your phone. But you're calling your wife and you're making lists for what to get for groceries.
Right.
That's not public information, okay? However, you're talking to a developer about an issue that might come up in the county commission that you might have to vote on. That's business.
Right.
So if it's government business, it's a public record.
Right.
If it's not government, and it doesn't matter whether you use your personal account at home or your personal phone at work. The fact is, if you're talking about government business, it's not exempt.
Well, how are they making that argument then? I don't understand.
Well, they're making the argument because there is a desire by many high-ranking politicians, and not least the governor himself, that his dealings should not be exposed. It's an argument that is
pass a constitutional amendment then, right?
Well, I mean, be careful what you ask for, because the governor's talking about that he has executive privilege.
Yes.
Executive privilege is a federal idea.
Yeah, there is. That's never been recognized.
We've never had it in Florida, yet he's asserting it. Why? Because a lot of people in power, especially those people that are trying to remake how power works, feel that all of the conversations they have should not be held accountable to public scrutiny. That the only narrative that people should have is the narrative that they explain. And in my opinion, I understand why they feel that way, but that sentiment is the antithesis of democracy.
Okay, Clarice Starling, we're looking at you. Thank you so much, Bobby Block. It's been a pleasure chatting with you, and I can't wait to get together and chat some more.
I hope what I said was clear, and again, the only thing I want to say is I want to make it absolutely clear. No political party, no political viewpoint in any way has a monopoly on wanting to silence people or wanting to get its own way. This is the dynamic that frames a lot of our debate. So when you're in power, you want to protect the power as you see fit. And when you're out of power, you want to deny the other people power. It's a game that we constantly play, but we have to keep our eyes on the prize. And the eyes on the prize is this is for everyone, and it needs to work for everyone.
Thank you again, Bobby. Talk to you soon.
Bye, and thank you.
Thanks for listening to Deeper Dive with Dara, a podcast by the News Service of Florida, hosted by News Service senior writer Dara Cam and produced by me, Mike Exline. Music for the podcast was recorded by Periodic Labs, LLC.